Raj, I met you, I think you were Chief Strategy Officer at Lyft when we first met. And around that time, I met a couple interesting people. I met Scott Case, who was the co-founder and CTO of Priceline, who had made a transition into climate. As I mentioned earlier, Brian Halligan from HubSpot, who made a transition into climate. And yourself, who came out of a variety of tech companies, most recently Lyft, into climate. Talk a little about that transition. Why are we seeing these amazing, including yourself, entrepreneurs and leaders leaving other sectors and going to climate? Is it a financial motivation? Is it a sort of a responsibility to do the right thing? Is it a combination of both? But why are we seeing a lot of that transition?
It's a good question. It first started out to be around purpose. So I was sitting, I think it was 2008 at TED, and I saw John Doerr, who some of you may know. He's a famous venture capitalist from Kleiner Perkins. I worked at one of his companies. And this other guy, Al Gore, no one knows that guy. And they were up on stage, and Al gave the data, he gave the case. And for me, I've always wanted to have some purpose, that's I thought outside of business. That was the initial theory, that it has to be outside of business. And then I saw John Doerr get up on stage with his daughter. And he started crying, and it wasn't bullshit. He was really crying. And he was saying, I cannot leave the world in this place. And as I really thought about it, I was like, oh my God, this is like the most difficult problem that everyone has to do, and there's no clear solution. I got to work on it. This is amazing. And so for me, it started that way, and I first thought I could do something on the nonprofit side. I started some crazy social game on Facebook back in those days and got $500,000 from the EPA. I don't know why they gave me money to do that. And it didn't work. And I was like scratching my head, said maybe I should invest in this. And so looked at kind of different ways. This was back in the days of clean tech and doing it. And back then there were limited opportunities because where we were was around basically the disruption of the energy industry back in the mid-2000s and early 2010. And so that was kind of like, the way I look at it is in the media world where you're in, there's digitization. It was a massive trend. It created so much wealth in venture capital in Silicon Valley. And it started with media. Like every media company was disrupted by it. They didn't have engineers to fight back, and it kind of changed. But then, as Marc Andreessen said, software started eating the world, and everything got digitized. Anything that could be digitized got digitized. What I saw evolve was now we're moving away from just clean tech around energy, but decarbonization is really what the trend is. And everything that can be decarbonized will be decarbonized. It's just a matter of time and a matter of principle and effort. And so
you see this as the second wave, right? So you talk about
this is the second wave, which is that the first wave was let's get cleaner energy. Now it's everything needs to be decarbonized. When I came into it, it was about purpose. What I realized, it's even probably an order of magnitude more economic value than what we experience with digitization. It's harder. That was about bits. This is about bits and atoms. That's super hard. It requires collective action, which a lot of digitization doesn't. But the opportunity is there. Marry that with the fact that I don't want to leave this world in a bad place for my 4 kids. And that's what's motivating me.
So, when you think about these ideas of conscious capitalism or stakeholder capitalism, at the end of the day, there's still capitalism, right? We still need to deliver some returns to our shareholders, our investors. But what you're saying is we could actually still do good, right? The doing well and doing good can go hand in hand. You don't see those as a trade-off.
So it will be a trade-off at some point in terms of doing good to the full net zero planet that's there. But to get there, there's a lot of opportunity where we can do good and also provide value. So when I think about the net zero challenge that the planet faces by 2050, now some are saying 2040, that's there. To me, it kind of goes into 2 sections, phases, I would say. And they have to be done in parallel, but there's different ways to look at it. And one, which I think is where we play as an investment firm, is what I would call efficiency tech. So climate tech is so broad and used in so many different ways. We were trying to think of how do we really narrow it down to something that people understand. Efficiency tech is what is the software and hardware and technology that can be created that can lower emissions but also provide business value at the same time. That double win is aligned with capitalism. Who doesn't want to be more efficient? Factories want to be more efficient. And software is great at that, at bringing in efficiency. Robotics, all the things that we're looking at that are there. That, I would call it almost the low-hanging fruit, but I think we are like in inning 2 of that low-hanging fruit. And then phase 2 is, okay, we've wreaked out all the efficiency in the system. Now we need new materials, new processes, and we need to come up with different ways of doing things entirely. And some things are going to just be extracting carbon where there isn't a price or an economic benefit right now, the way that capitalism is set up.
So we just heard, in the last session about sort of inputs and supply chain, right? So when you talk about efficiency, it's how do I reduce either the energy needed, the materials needed to produce, sort of a certain output. Is that a software typically based solution, or?
So there are a lot of different ways to do it. There's even good old-fashioned better processes in a company, but where we invest, where our comparative advantages, and I think every person in this room should think about, what is your comparative advantage to make a difference in what we're about to do? And I'm not going to be a good politician. I'm not probably the organizational behavioral scientist that is there, but I think I know how to invest in startups that are software that can bring efficiency into companies. Enterprise software, mobility software, things like that. And there's still hardware there, but really the core value is software.
So, great. So you're investing, like we've heard from a bunch of the venture capitalists today, at a seed, at an early stage, at a seed, maybe or even pre-seed. You're de-risking some of these companies. You're getting them into pilots and sort of talk about then the need to scale, right? We had earlier Carbon Free. They'd raised about $150 million. They're really now in the market, but the amount of capital that's needed to now scale these businesses. Are the follow-on funding, is the follow-on funding there? Do you see the bigger venture capital firms ready to kind of follow on to some of your early investments?
Yeah. At first, it's useful to I like to always separate out the world a little bit, because I think the answer depends on what we're looking at. And for me, there's 3 broad areas to do it. One is software, scaling software companies. The second is scaling hardware and software companies. And the third is scaling deep tech. And I'm just looking at climate tech. There's lots of scaling that needs to happen. And most of the problem is not climate tech to get to a net zero planet, but it's a part of it that we can help in getting there. So when you look at those 3, people think intuitively that you don't need that much money to scale software. That's not true. If you look at most enterprise SaaS companies, they've raised hundreds of millions of dollars, typically because the sales and marketing involved are significant in terms of penetrating into the organization and doing that. And the metrics are well known on how much ARR you need, the growth rates, the margins, and all this stuff is kind of out there. And if you can show revenue traction, forget about the fact that it's climate, because it's efficiency tech, you can get the capital that's there.
Yeah.
So I think that problem is there as long as there is a business benefit. And one of the biggest things around scaling companies is that if you find you have a software solution, a lot of software does a lot of good. But the real thing that creates multi-billion-dollar companies and big impact, because I don't think we're going to get big impact in climate without for-profit. Nonprofits can't scale to meet the net zero goals we have. So if you're going to get really significant impact in there, it has to be a painkiller and not a vitamin. Mm-hmm. Oftentimes you go pitch someone, if you're lucky, at an enterprise and say, hey, look, I got this efficiency. And they're looking at the list and saying, okay, that's number 55 on my list of things to do. And they never really buy it. And you get a lot of false positives, because the first 10 customers, you went out and found 10 people that are believers.
It'll validate your...
But are there really 50,000 customers that are believers? So that's really the hard part in doing it, is figuring out what is a painkiller for a company versus a vitamin. And emissions alone, unfortunately, are not a painkiller today alone.
Yeah. So when you advise a company, how do you then, that's coming in, to your portfolio, how do you help them tell that story and sort of work with, their potential customers?
And I think this is probably one of the biggest challenges. Usually a climate tech entrepreneur has a good idea of what's the problem that's out there. And here's my solution. Could be software, software plus hardware. I'm not going to touch deep tech right now, but we can go there if you want. And so how do you come in with that information then into the go-to-market? Now that's what's aha here is that the aha is that a lot of that go-to-market motion is the same as what we've seen in general tech. And so what we need is even more of an influx of people that have grown technology companies that understand how to scale up, understand how to do a go-to-market motion that's there. They're typically being sold into a very similar person, whether it's the CFO or someone that's there, if it's facilities. There may be a sustainability person, but the reality is very few, no offense to the sustainability heads that are here, very few of you have any money. Right? So you can make some sort of direction about what to do, but at the end of the day, someone who has the budget is making the decision. So the good news is that in this zip code, we have a lot of people that have done this before at hyperscale. And I think that's what we need is to connect and bridge these entrepreneurs and bring them in and really act as if it's a general enterprise company.
So the Sequoias, the Andreessens, the larger VCs, all the entrepreneurs that have scaled this will start to look at these other types of companies and be advisors, join them to help them.
So I'm seeing, here's another example that's really exciting. So I used to invest when I was at Mayfield, VC firm in Silicon Valley, in programmatic advertising. So what happened in the online advertising world is that it went, you know this, it went from salespeople selling and putting pitch decks to it being basically all electronic, a bidding system, buyers and sellers going into programmatic buying and selling. So that bought a breed of all these interesting engineers and people that knew how to build real-time auctioning systems that were there, and they even applied to, like, AdWords is a great example of that for Google. And some of those entrepreneurs, 2 of them, in fact, have come out to me in the last 30 to 60 days and said, I see something that's happening in energy, which is that energy is going to be bought and sold on a discrete level, almost real time. And it's starting to happen in Australia, it's starting to happen in the UK, a little bit in Texas, in California. And once we get into that, you'll have the programmatic buying and selling of energy. You couple that in, for example, I'm looking at a company right now that does induction stove and oven that is being mandated to replace gas because, like they were talking about NYSA, New York Housing Authority, like they're shutting off gas in buildings. You have no choice. So it's a painkiller, not a vitamin. You need something. But what it is the appliance has a battery. Every appliance is going to have a battery. And appliances are going to have to be buying and selling, knowing when to pull and take electricity and potentially selling electricity back, just like an EV car battery will as well. So we get into this interesting world where we can transfer the skills that we had in general tech and bring it to the energy industry, which is going to be necessary to drive efficiency. One other point was that batteries up till now have not been cost effective to scale, especially at large scale. Put them in grids, microgrids, wherever. When the battery can actually store energy and not just put it back into the network as necessary, but actually go sell it back when the prices are higher, all of a sudden the ROI is penciling out on batteries. And you're seeing almost every renewable project now includes large-scale batteries.
So in your programmatic example, relies on heavy, automation. Automation is something that you're really interested in, automating systems, processes, all the way through even hardware, robotics. Talk a little about why you see that as a big opportunity.
So, this goes at a super high level. I think we are at an unbelievable point in time that I would venture to say 2 to 3 years from now, almost everything that we're doing is going to look so foreign to where we are. And it's a confluence of AI, robotics, and synthetic biology. And they're all happening at the same time, and they're all impacting each other. And I'll give you an example. I did field robotics at Carnegie Mellon back in the 1990s, so that dates me a little bit. And manipulation seems like such an easy problem, right? Like I pick this up, and I can touch this, and I can touch this, and it just seems so easy. But when you take manipulation and figuring out there's probably 2,000 actuators that need to be there to pick up almost anything in a human hand, and they need to act in a really fast frequency to do that. And they need to understand that I don't put too much pressure here and break this glass versus not, and what's the right amount of grip strength. That problem in the past has been so difficult for roboticists because it's using algorithms that are very brittle, and there's just too many variables, like what Karthik was talking about. There's like thousands and thousands of variables. So what we're using now is deep learning, where we don't really need to understand what it is, but there's thousands and thousands of variables that a deep learning neural network is figuring out, and it's happening. Like there's a company Figure that started, and they started, I think it was like 6 months into starting. They used some deep learning algorithms. They used some of the capabilities of OpenAI, and they were able to do like clean dishes, do things, talk at the same time, pick up all sorts of flimsy objects, everything, after starting the company 6 months in doing it. We invested.
So the barriers to entry
barriers to entry. There's going to be a Cambrian explosion of startups. Software, we saw this. Like when I started a photo company, there were 100 other photo companies that started within a month in doing it. Now we're going to see in robots. So I'm looking at the solar robotics field where we have utility scale solar. We have to install like 10 or 20x the amount of solar to meet the needs, especially of AI, all the data centers that we talked about earlier in the day. And there's just no way that humans can do it fast enough. And one of the biggest issues that they have is picking up the panels and putting them on, and in wind, and it's outdoors, and there's all sorts of variables that are there. It was a hard robotics problem that is finally being solved. But it's being solved so quickly that there's a dozen startups, and they're all showing progress on less than $1 million. So like we are moving at such a rapid clip. And then when you combine that with, if you need to create something organic, you'll use a $25,000 DNA synthesizer, which you can buy right now in doing it. And then so everything is feeding it onto each other. You can replicate the robots. When the humanoid knows manipulation that was just built in 6 months, the other million humanoids get updated automatically to do it. So my fear is I'm about to invest in a company that's this little robot to do solar installation. Holy crap, in 2 years, maybe there'll be a humanoid robot company that disrupts the company that I just invested in. And it's going to cost $800 because how cheap, it's not going to be that expensive, to have a humanoid robot. And so like, it's going to be mind-boggling of how quickly things are going to move because of the synchronicities that we just can't even understand right now.
And when you look at, here we sit, Silicon Valley, and as I said in the opening, when we started this event, we purposely obviously wanted to do it here as well as in New York because we thought it was two slightly different perspectives of the entrepreneurs here in the Valley versus, the entrepreneurs potentially in, East Coast, Boston, New York. Do you see, any differences in the types of businesses, the types of companies that are addressing climate that are coming from the Valley versus coming from other cities?
So I don't see much of it. I think that great companies are being started everywhere. And I think that technology, ideas, and the initial ingredients to start a company is democratized. I'm seeing incredible ideas in the EU. I'm seeing incredible entrepreneurs in Australia with just as good solid ideas as they are in Silicon Valley. However, what we talked about earlier, scaling up. I was part of Lyft, and I went in there, and we were scaling up. When I came in, there were 500 employees, and there were 5,000 a few years later. We went public, and I just saw this mass influx of people that were super smarter than me, and, from Google and Facebook and all of that in. I was wondering, like, why? It's because these people have scaled up really fast and have learned processes and ways of doing things that are, they're not in London. Maybe London, but they're certainly not in Johannesburg or somewhere like that. So there is something unique about rapid scaling that exists here. Big, big infrastructure.
Access to talent,
yeah,
capital.
and look at AI.
Yeah.
It's like, I think 40% of real estate in San Francisco is now AI, of commercial real estate. There's a big vacancy, but of what is vacant or not vacant, it's already quickly going to be more than half of real estate. So we have, just like everyone said, okay, San Francisco's dead. It's not dead. AI's back. Cool restaurants are opening up.
But they need humans that have jobs to be able to afford
humanoids.
to go. So, you mentioned sort of this 2-3 year time horizon. Originally we said, we're sitting here 10 years from now. I mean, I don't think any of us can any longer predict what a decade from now looks like. But what does 2 years from now look like, right? What's the difference in the conversation we're having a couple years
So I'll give you an example. Every one of our companies that we're backing, I'm telling them, forget about their product. Just look at how they're organized. Be willing every 6 months to throw up your organization and throw it out the window. Because I think what you needed 20 people for in 2 years, you're going to need 3 people for. You still need people. I don't think we're at the point, like we talk about AGI, which is the really cool thing, artificial intelligence. General intelligence. There's a guy who started Inflection. He's now head of Microsoft AI. Mustafa Suleyman. He's a great book, The Coming Wave. And there he talks about the fact that who cares about that? What we really care about is ACI, artificially capable intelligence. And he has an interesting test. His test is, I know I'm in artificially capable intelligence land in the world when I can give an AI $100,000 and tell it to make $1 million on Amazon without human intervention. And if you think about all the steps to do that, we are probably within a year's away from doing that, where it can do everything. It can create video, it can create photos, it can analyze prices, it can go get an Alibaba account, it can do customer support, drop ship, everything can be done. So if that's the case, what does an organization look like in doing it?
And what does that mean? You know, again, earlier we've talked to your point, big organizations and startups. Easy for an earlier stage company to say, let's blow up our business model, let's blow up what we're doing and try differently. What does that mean to the big companies? How should a big company, if they're hearing that, say, we can't do that. We have legacy real estate, we have legacy people. How would you think the big company?
If we saw disruption that happened in digitization, where media companies, for example, are like, they're a fraction.
Remember, we still print a magazine.
Yeah, I'm sorry. But they're a fraction of what they were. And that happened over a time scale, right? It took a while, the time scale. The time scale that it's going to happen if you can't change is going to be really quick. Really, really quick. Because someone else can get the behemoth of what you have and the knowledge and the intensity and using robotics and potentially synthetic biology, like everything done in such a fast manner that by the time you even sit in your boardroom to make a decision, it's going to be too late. So I think what we're going to see is everything gets compressed down. And it's going to be really difficult for incumbents.
Yeah, so it'll be an interesting couple of years to watch. But,
yeah, and I used to think it's 10 years, but like it's couple years. We're not talking about something that's so far out.
Right. Well, Raj, thank you for joining and for your energy today at the end of the day. Let's everyone give a round of applause to Raj.